Shrug family, this week on Barbell Shrugged, Zachary Carson from the U.S. Air Force. He's an exercise physiologist with one mission in life: to create the best pilots in the world, which is super cool. And we're actually working on a bunch of stuff with him right now so we can help that mission. And he came in today. I actually have a very good friend of mine that was a Blue Angel pilot, went to Top Gun in the Navy, like total badass pilot. And I always used to think about how essentially the locker room of the Blue Angels, or the locker room where those guys are getting ready and practicing at Top Gun, is essentially like the highest level sports team. They just don't play sports. They don't play football or hockey or basketball. They fly planes. But it's the exact same thing. I mean, there's an enormous number of pilots that exist in this world. And to be at the level of performance that those pilots, specifically the ones that Zach works with in the Air Force, you're a total savage if you are working with Zach. And in today's show, we dig through everything that the pilots are doing to prepare their bodies, everything that the Air Force is investing into their pilots, because obviously the hardware side of things, the actual planes, do such enormously cool maneuvers at this point. But how do we keep their bodies and their brains from breaking down with the immense amount of force that is pushed on the body when you have a plane that performs the way it does? And it's a very cool conversation that you're going to be a part of today. As always, friends, make sure you head over to ratelab.com. That is where you can learn more about all the lab testing, analysis, coaching, program design that we do inside Rapid Health Optimization signature program Arate. And you can access all of that at ratelab.com. Friends, let's get into the show. Welcome to Barbell Shrugged. I'm Anders Varner, Doug Larson, Zachary Carson. I'm going to be super official. You are the exercise physiologist for the best pilots in the world. That's your job. When you wrote me the first message, you said, I want to build the best pilots in the world. I went, me too. That sounds awesome. That's like the best mission statement you could have in your job. Welcome to the show, man. I'd love for you kind of open it up here. I'd love to just hear a little bit of background on yourself and how you got to the position to create the best pilots in the world.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm super pumped, super excited about your show, obviously. I've been a huge fan for several years. So when I first wrote you, obviously, I was just super jazzed up about my current opportunity because I'm at the United States Air Force Weapons School. Embedded in the schoolhouse as the aerospace physiologist for, as you mentioned, some of the best pilots, the best air crew, and some of the best operators in the world. So how did I get here? My journey is a little bit unorthodox compared to some. I graduated high school, had the typical, I don't really know what I want to do mentality, and then I decided to join the Navy. I decided to join the Navy. I thought Special Forces would be a good fit just because you see the videos, you see the movies, you read the books, and everything just sounds awesome. And so I went and did the rescue swimmer thing. I went and joined the Navy. I went and through the rescue swimmer schoolhouse. And
were you out in San Diego for that?
I was out in San Diego.
I worked with all those divers.
Yeah. So I think
down in Coronado.
Yeah, down in Coronado. Yep.
Yeah.
I think my first introduction to Barbell Shrugged was when I was still stationed in San Diego.
Stop it.
Yeah, I think.
Did I train you?
No, I don't believe so.
Yeah,
but I remember
with a bunch of people down there.
But just the CrossFit scene was huge out there, right?
Monstrous.
So I remember kind of getting plugged in and watching some of the podcasts back then on YouTube before podcasting was really even a thing, right? So I was out there for 6 years. I got to do that thing. I got to jump out of helicopters, got to fly around, do a whole bunch of stuff with the Special Forces community, fast ropes, rappelling, picking boats out of the water, dropping boats in the water, a lot of really cool stuff. So I did that for 6 years, got 3 deployments in, a whole bunch of hours in that aircraft, been all around the world. And then I decided to get out. I decided to get out of the military for a couple of years, decided I wanted to be a professional student. And utilize my GI Bill for anybody out there that's like wondering about the military. One of the best, it's not even a best kept secret anymore, but one of the best things that you can do is go serve your time and then get free education, right? So I went back to school. I went to Grand Valley State University for their exercise physiology program and crushed that for a couple years. At that point, met my wife, and we kind of hit it off. And I had always wanted to possibly go back into the military, but then there's always that, hey, life-changing situations that are going on. But I did end up applying for the Air Force and the Navy. So the Air Force and the Navy are the only two programs in the DoD that have aerospace physiology. I knew I wanted to do physiology. I loved the physiology stuff that I did in the Navy. So helicopter communities, they have to go through like aviation physiology and do the Dunker tank. And it's basically just this huge tank that drops you in the water, spins you around, gets you all disoriented, and then you have to like escape it as if it was a crash. So I've always been interested in that, loved the information that they had because it was all about performance and working out and exercise and diet. So going back to current time, I applied for the Air Force and they accepted me. So I commissioned as an officer into the aerospace physiology program back in 2018. I've been doing that ever since. Since that point in time, I have been at Vance Air Force Base. I've been at Shaw Air Force Base, Elmendorf Air Force Base up in Anchorage, Alaska. So that was a cool experience. And then currently at the weapons school as the aerospace physiology fellow for the weapons school, taking care of all of their squadrons. So it's a massive enterprise here, and they train the best to be the best. And they basically employ me as a human factors expert where I can research, identify, and develop mitigation techniques for human performance issues that they may be experiencing while flying their respective platforms.
Super cool. First off, when you say weapons school, that's Top Gun, right? The Navy has Top Gun and you have weapons school, but they're like the same. You guys do like the dog fighting, everything that Tom Cruise does, right?
Yes.
But better.
Well, better is a strong word, right? I got
I'm
bros
saying it for you.
I got bros on both sides of the curtain, right? I know guys in the Navy, I know guys in the Air Force. It's a little bit different. So the Navy also has a weapons school, fully ingrained weapons school. So the weapons school in the Air Force is about 6 months. Top Gun is a much shorter program, and Top Gun is really just about the tactical employment of the fighter pilot, whereas the weapons school is the tactical and strategic employment and development of not only the fighter pilot, but also the weapons system and how they operate. Now, the Navy does that too, but Top Gun is just that specialty program where it's almost exclusively focused on the fighting, the dog fighting aspect, like you mentioned, right? So anytime somebody asks, like, what do you do? I'm like, well, I'm at the weapons school. It's kind of like Top Gun. So we just don't sing "Goodness Gracious, Great Balls on Fire" like they do, I guess.
No shirtless double high fives on the beach playing volleyball with your bros? No?
I mean, there's only desert here, so not a lot of beach.
I'm from San Diego. I'm down with the shirtless high five, by the way. I have like a real confession that
Dr. Andy Galpin here. As a listener of the show, you've probably heard us talking about the RTA program, which we're all incredibly proud of. It's a culmination of everything Dan Garner and I have learned over more than 2 decades of working with some of the world's most elite performers, award-winning athletes, billionaires, musicians, executives, and frankly, anyone who just wanted to be at their absolute best. RTA is not a normal coaching program. It's not just macros and a workout plan. It's not physique transformation and pre and post pictures. RTA is something completely different. RTA is incredibly comprehensive and designed to uncover your unique molecular signature, find your performance anchors, and solve them permanently. You'll be working with not one person, but rather a full team of elite professionals, each with their own special expertise to maximize precision, accuracy, and effectiveness of your analysis and optimization plan. RTA isn't about treating symptoms or quick fixes. It's about unlocking your full potential and looking, feeling, and performing at your absolute best, physically and mentally, when the stakes are the highest. To learn more, visit aratelab.com. That's ARETE lab.com. Now, back to the show.
When I hop on the Southwest flight and I am headed to wherever the fitness industry has taken me to go hang out with Doug Larson, and we're going on a little trip together, I get on that plane and I'm like, you know what? This might be the end. I'm on this city bus that's flying around at 500 miles an hour. You guys are going like Mach 3, like speeds that I can't even imagine what's going on, breaking sound barriers, doing, I mean, like literally the highest performing maneuvers that exist. And I'm over here on the Southwest flight, and I kind of just assume this thing might not make it. How do you keep people's bodies? Like what is kind of like the physical demand? Because it's not really like the Southwest flight to Baltimore. It's got to be one of the most physically taxing things, taking your brain, like hitting the gas on your car where your head snaps back, but at like thousands of miles an hour. Like what are kind of like the physical demands of actually being in the cockpit of something that goes that speed and doing the turns and everything else that is like required to fly like an F-16?
Yeah. So first of all, the aviation community is inherently dangerous, right? No matter how fast you're going.
Thanks for giving me the confidence to get on the Southwest flight now.
Yeah. So there's a reason that we have these protective mechanisms around us when we go into the aviation environment, right? I like to tell people that the human body is built for standing upright on
Yeah.
2 feet with all of our senses firing around us at 1 atmosphere of pressure, right? That's what
Yeah.
God created us for. He didn't create us to go 800 miles per hour and then to shoot straight up into the sky, right?
Yeah.
Actually, on that note, like he was saying commercial flights, they're going 500-600 miles an hour, and then he was saying thousands, but he's kind of joking, like you don't really go thousands of miles an hour. Like it's not so much the speed as it is the turns and the G forces and all of that, right? That are like the real stressors involved.
Yes. Yeah. So that's what I was just going to dive into. So our bread and butter as physiologists is hypoxia. So less oxygen at altitude, right? Air is thinner. We can't breathe as well. So our bread and butter really is hypoxia, but that's not the only threat when we're talking about the aviation environment. As Doug just mentioned, when it comes to fighter pilots, especially, the G forces is incredibly stressful on the body. We also deal with situational awareness, spatial disorientation, right? So your vestibular apparatus in there going all kinds of crazy. If you've ever experienced vertigo, those kind of things we have to teach for. And then noise and vibration can cause a ton of irritation as well and have some stressors on the body. So when it comes to physiology, it's kind of all those things encompassing. And then also, as we're focusing on the fighter pilot, really the stresses on the body from the G forces is really the most important thing that we work on mitigating and strategizing towards success for.
Wait, and like physiologically, everyone's heard of G forces, and yeah, at some level they probably realize if the G forces are too high, then they'll black out. But that might be as far as it goes for a lot of people. Like what physiologically, what is actually happening there, and like why would you black out, and what other problems that aren't quite as serious are also woven into the mix there?
Yeah, so G forces are, it's not simply just gravity pulling down on you, it's the acceleration of the aircraft over the gravity. And that gives us what we call big G, little z. So G forces can work on our body in a variety of different ways. GZ is going to be straight up and down through the body. And then you have GY, which is through the chest, forward and back, and then GX out to the sides. So what we really focus on when we're talking about jets turning is going to be GZ, because what it's doing is it's pulling you down into your seat. And when you're experiencing that G-force or you're under that load, all of your blood is rushing to your lower extremities, right?
Yeah.
And when we're thinking about blood, where does it need to be? It needs to be
Brain.
in the nugget up top, in the brain, right? So as soon as we start to have that depletion in blood pressure in the brain, we're going to start experiencing what I like to call the red flags of G-induced loss of consciousness, or G-lock, which you've probably commonly heard, right? So as that blood pressure drops and we start to lose that blood up top, we start to have visual effects first and foremost, because our eyes are essentially tissue extensions of our brain. And we start to experience the curtains kind of closing, or maybe the peephole effect, graying out of the eyes. We start to lose that color vision very rapidly. And also, if it gets to a certain point, we can actually lose all visual representation. We can black out before we lose consciousness, because our ocular pressure is actually slightly above our brain pressure. So that's kind of a bizarre experience that I've never had flying, but some people will experience like a full blackout. But like they'll say, I still remember what was happening. Because when we're talking about millimeters of mercury, your ocular pressure is actually right around 20 millimeters of mercury. So if you exceed less than 20, your brain still might be conscious, but you just don't have any visual representation, which is kind of bizarre to think about. So in a nutshell, what you're doing is you're just losing blood from the head, and we need to actively employ what's called the anti-G straining maneuver, where we employ this method to get the blood back up to our brain so we can continue performing in that environment.
Yeah, so the brain being one piece of that, but you were also saying there's like a plane that goes through your chest. Is there some sort of like cardiac pressure?
Yes.
That one seems even more terrifying because you can kind of come back from the blackout by going slower, I would imagine. But having like a cardiac event from G forces sounds way scarier while you're
Yes.
flying the plane.
So that's pretty rare in general. I mean, there's a whole bunch of mechanisms that start to take over in your body. So you are correct. Your heart, your lungs, your internal organs, they're all suspended, right? They're all connected by tissues and they're suspended. So there will be some movement of all those organs in your body when you're under G forces.
Yeah.
But it just hasn't been shown to have a great effect. Even though when you are under G, you're obviously experiencing a ton of hormone, or a ton of like endocrine dump. And what we're talking about is, that classic flight or fight response. So your heart does start pumping a little bit faster. Your blood pressure goes up a little bit. All those things start to happen as soon as you experience that acceleration physiology. And it basically feels like you're sprinting 100 meters when you're pulling 7 to 9 Gs for a couple of seconds.
Is that where the fitness component comes into play here? Like, how does being healthy and or in good shape influence like how many G's you can take, or how you respond and adapt, or how you're able to handle these stressors successfully, and at a minimum stay conscious, but beyond that, be able to perform at your best and actually like accomplish the mission and do the job that you're signed up to do.
Yeah. So before I answer that question, I just want to tackle one thing that I mentioned, the AGSM, the anti-G straining maneuver. Let me just break that down for you real quick to tell you exactly what it is, how we mitigate those risks, and then I'll talk about the fitness component and how that comes into it. So the AGSM is 3 components. It's a lower body strain, essentially where we're trying to tighten all the muscles in the lower body. I like to focus on squeezing the glutes, bracing the gut or the abs, obviously the core, trying to pull your hamstrings in by like digging your heels into the floor, and then trying to engage your adductors as well, pretending that you have a ball between your knees. So you're basically engaging everything in your lower body that you possibly can to squeeze that blood and force it back to the heart, where it can push it back to the brain. The second component is going to be...
Everybody driving their car right now just did that. You can't help it. I was doing it while you were explaining it.
That's
I'm like,
fair.
oh, now I'm ready. Go
I mean,
ahead.
we have to chair fly all the time when we're teaching this specific measure, right? So we're always squeezing our butt and trying to breathe and trying to go through the motions. It's kind of difficult to do when you're not under G, right? Because even though you're driving a car or you're sitting in your chair, you're squeezing all those muscles and you can't really feel if you're making a difference or not, because we just don't know, because we're not under G. So the second component is going to be the breathing component. And that's going to be a cyclic breathing, where we essentially take a prep breath in, and then we hold that air in the back of our throat against the closed glottis. So we kind of hook that air into the back of our throats, take a breath in, hold it, and then we have to breathe every 2.5 to 3 seconds. It's a forceful exhale and a very quick inhale. So it almost sounds like a K. It sounds like this.
Oh, it's like breathing at the top of a squat.
That's exactly it. So that's actually how I
See?
teach it to
Ah,
people.
look at that. Meathead language always wins.
That's how I teach it to people that know how to work out. I'll say, do you know like when you're squatting and you're wearing a belt and
Yeah,
you
that's awesome.
take that breath and create that intra-abdominal pressure and do the Valsalva,
Yeah,
and then you breathe at the top. And some guys, like you
love
said,
that.
the bros and the meatheads, they get it.
They get it.
Other people are just staring at me like, what's this guy talking about?
That's great.
So yeah, that's exactly it. We have to do that every 2.5 to 3 seconds. So what that's doing is it's maintaining positive chest pressure. And then obviously we're getting that exchange because when you're under G, it feels like an elephant sitting on your chest, right? So if you
Yeah.
exhale too much, you'll collapse your chest. And if you inhale too much, you'll create too much pressure. And then when you try to breathe, you'll dump it all. You'll basically just dump all that gas.
Is
So
that like
that's,
kind of like the blood pressure like
yes,
dropping even if you're like in a gym and you feel that like your blood pressure just like drops on you, you'll just pass out even though you're standing on the ground.
yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's how it can feel if you aren't executing this correctly. The third component is just simply a relaxed upper body. So people tend to get really tense through the shoulders, and then kind of like squeeze their neck out. You get that nice little
Yeah.
neck winging, just because it's pretty stressful. So we try to teach a relaxed upper body, you know, chest out, shoulders back, nice and relaxed. Let your shoulders kind of melt into the seat, is what I like to say.
Hmm.
And then we go through that whole process. So we have to apply that simultaneously. So the lower body squeeze is pushing the blood back up to the heart to get it to the brain. That cyclic breathing is maintaining that positive chest pressure, also keeping the variability between our blood pressure, and then relaxing the upper body not to take away from anything of the other two components. So going back to Doug's original question about fitness, we teach performance threats as well when we're teaching our physiology classes, and we try to focus in on diet and exercise, right? Exercise is medicine, is what I like to say. And the fact of the matter is that some of these guys are pretty fit and some of them are not. Really, the most important thing that you can do for making sure that you don't G-lock is one, stay hydrated and execute your AGSM. If you do those two things, you're going to be fine. I know guys that are rail thin that fly jets. I know guys that are nice and stocky. I know guys that are tall. I know guys that are short. If you can do it, if you can execute that technique and you can maintain your hydration and have some nutrition, like you're usually going to be okay. But exercise goes a long way to improve the sustainability and to improve the ability to go out there and do this for many repetitions. So what we always teach is obviously the standard. Hey, you need cardiovascular and you need strength training, right? So the cardiovascular component is going to be moving blood. So the more efficiently we can move blood with our heart, the better. And then that strength component is really going to be allowing us to execute that nice lower body strain to get that blood back where it needs to go. So if you're fairly thin, you're probably going to have to work harder. But if you got some nice meat down there and the glutes and the
Yeah.
thighs, it's going to be really easy to just get a good squeeze. But
Being
also,
jacked always matters.
yeah, I mean, it's you can't deny the literature, right? So when you're thinking about doing the AGSM, we're not just sitting in the cockpit with no additional gear on, right? So when you see
Yeah.
a fighter pilot, they're all just like loaded out in all this garb, right? So I would be doing a disservice if I didn't talk about the aircrew flight equipment as well.
Yeah.
And those guys are outstanding. They maintain all the gear that the pilots wear. So when we're talking about fighter pilots, they're going to wear what's called the G suit in the lower half. So it's a full coverage G suit that starts basically just below the bottom rib, and then it covers all the way down to their ankles. And that thing inflates all the way through. All right. So when the aircraft senses about 2 Gs, that thing automatically inflates. Now, what that does is it creates a whole bunch of pressure in the legs for you to squeeze against and assist getting that blood back up. So we like to say that the G suit covers about 3 to 4 Gs of protection. And then we also have our helmet and mask, right? So they're wearing a helmet and a mask, and that mask is going to provide what's called positive pressure breathing. So the flow of O2 coming into their mask will actually increase to assist in that breathing mechanism. So those are the two big things. There's also some different pressure garments that they can wear on their vest. That's more the F-22, F-35 type bros that are flying that aircraft. And that has a lot to do with just flying at higher altitudes and that possible risk for decompression. But when it comes to pulling Gs, the G suit and that mask are really going to be big helpers in making sure that you can execute that AGSM.
Yeah. And on top of all of the kind of like physiological demands that you just walked through, there also has to be like a very high level of critical thinking at high speeds. I'd love for you to dig into kind of like what the training or how you guys start to not just teach the surviving the G-force side of things, but then adding critical thinking into that, which is going to be kind of like the more real world scenario that these pilots are going to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of that situational awareness piece that I mentioned at the beginning, right? The evolution of aviation is an interesting one, right? As planes get better, pilots kind of stay the same, right? I mentioned this the other day when we had a couple of calls. The jet or the aircraft that you're flying is built for the mission. It does the mission really well. It's loaded up with weapons and it can go execute that mission. The human is going to be the limiting factor. So how do we integrate that human into the system and make sure that they can perform at a high level? So like the evolution of aviation basically says like hypoxia. Well, as planes went higher, they realized people were passing out. Hypoxia. They figured that out. They created pressurized cockpits. They started putting masks on pilots to give them supplemental oxygen. So cool, solve that problem. Not necessarily solved, but have a pretty good handle on it, right?
Yeah.
Then planes started going higher and they started going faster. G-forces, right? We started experiencing jets. So they started figuring out what gear they needed to put on the pilots. They started developing that AGSM that I talked about. Kind of mastered that a little bit. Well, as we have evolved into a fifth generation aircraft, our F-22s, our F-35s, and then some of the other aircraft as well, like our KC-46 that's coming online, our tankers, the B-21 that's coming online. Those are all kind of like sixth gen technologies is what they would call them. So the F-35 specifically is built to be a multi-role aircraft. It's supposed to do everything. It's supposed to be a fighter. It's supposed to be able to attack ground targets. It's supposed to be command and control center. And who's operating that aircraft?
Yeah.
One pilot, obviously communicating with several wingmen and utilizing their resources. But you have to employ a ton of bandwidth from your brain in order to figure out how to not only just continue to fly that aircraft, but also employ all the weapons, communicate, and manage your tasks accordingly. So that's kind of the new challenge for the aviation community is situational awareness and cognitive resources and how we're utilizing or how we're employing that pilot to make sure that they're making good decisions, right? So we educate them. We talk all about the situational awareness aspect. We try to teach something as simple as scanning techniques, how to communicate properly through good, what we call CRM, right? So CRM is going to be that cockpit resource management. And we try to tackle those with some basic, sometimes we'll put some stuff on the phone like a Stroop test and we'll just kind of go through some of those challenging games and see what how they handle those complex tasks.
Yeah.
We also are, using devices like the Synaptic where we're, light test and we're measuring complex tasks there. We can put some of that stuff into simulators as well and see how they're handling that cognitive load in a simulator. So when it comes to missions, pilots mission plan, they prepare, they fly their simulation in the simulator, and then they go employ the actual jet in the mission. So there's a lot of things that we're doing to tackle that piece in the Air Force and in the Navy right now, because that is kind of the growing concern, is that we're putting a ton of tasks on these individuals,
Yeah.
and we're expecting them to perform the same, which is really, really difficult to do in really any community, right? Let alone flying, like you said, Mach 3, which is maybe a few Machs faster than I might actually fly.
Yeah.
What is
I want to go Mach 3. I don't know if I want to or not. It just sounds like a razor. So
Tom Cruise,
the one I know.
he ejected at Mach 10, and how he didn't completely vaporize, we don't know. We don't
uh-huh.
know.
Hollywood.
Spontaneously combust
Yeah.
at that
That's
speed.
right. That's right.
What kind of volume are these guys experiencing on a mission or any training evolution? If you're flying for 2 hours, like every single time you turn more or less at any speed, are you having to do these maneuvers versus like 2Gs versus 3Gs versus 4Gs or whatever you get to versus um, you only have to do it when you're doing like kind of the most extreme maneuvers and that type of thing. Are you out for 2 hours and you have to do this the whole time? These max like lower body voluntary contractions over and over and over again, and it's physically exhausting because you're doing it so much. Or like what does like a normal hour or two in a jet look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So no, you're not under, 7, 8, 9 Gs the entire time you're flying, right? It's only when you're in a turn, right? And you're creating that acceleration over gravity. So a typical training sortie for most fighter pilots is anywhere between like 1 and 2 hours, depending on what the actual mission entails. So sometimes that's takeoff, go to the airspace, fight, come back and land. Sometimes that's come back, land, fuel up, so pit, and then go back out and fight. So it'd be like a fight pit fight. Sometimes you're tanking. So you go out there into the airspace, you tank, and then you come back into the airspace and continue your mission. So
Was tanking mean in this context?
so tanking is just getting fuel. So
Hmm.
you
Gotcha.
pull up underneath another aircraft and a little probe comes down and it plugs in and it refuels you on the go. So basically just giving you a little gas for a little extra airspace. So when you're thinking about jets deploying, they fly across the ocean, right? It's not like we load them up. I mean, the Navy loads them up on a ship sometimes and drives them across, right? But the Air Force doesn't have ships. So when you're talking about when we have jets deploy, we have to tank all the way across for those 7, 8, 9 hour sorties. A sortie is just a flight. So in context, if I'm ever using any jargon that you guys don't understand, just
We
please
picked that one up.
stop me. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyways, going back to your question, Doug, a typical training sortie is an out and back. So you take off, you go to the airspace, you come back and land. That'll be about 1 to 2 hours, depending on gas and fuel states. In that time frame, it really just depends on what you're actually doing. But let's just pretend we're doing a BFM flight, which is basic fighter maneuvers, which would be your dogfighting that you guys are talking about.
Mhm.
So when you're going out, you're either going to be in offensive or defensive posture, and you're probably going to do anywhere between 5 to 7 sets of dogfights. All right, so that's really all the gas that you can hold in a jet for the most part. And in any of those sets, you can expect between 5 to 9 Gs. When it comes to the AGSM and when it comes to how focused you have to be on making sure that you're employing those strategies that I was talking about earlier, 4 to 5 Gs, not really that stressful on the body. The G suit can kind of take care of you. The mask can kind of take care of you. So most of these guys, the guys that actually have experience, they can talk under 5 or 6 Gs and they can communicate still. When we're starting to push it up into the 7+ range, it's really tough on your body. And that's when you really have to focus in. And we always say to never get behind the G, right? So that is one of the main factors that lead to G lock, is when an individual pulls the jet too fast and they don't anticipate the G and they don't prepare themselves with that AGSM, right? So you should always be doing that AGSM prior to going into that maneuver, because if you don't and all of a sudden you find yourself under 7, 8, 9 Gs, you're not going to be able to get into that good AGSM.
Yeah.
So what I would say is 5 to 7 sets, anywhere between like 5 and 15 seconds per pull. I think the longest I've ever been in, like during a circle fight, where essentially I'm under about the peak pull was right around 9, and then you're kind of sitting at 7 for another like 15 seconds or so. So it's anywhere between 5 and 15 seconds at 7 to 9 Gs, 5 or 7 times during a standard training sortie. Now, one of the things that we're really facing today is what we call long duration sorties. So these individuals, due to the inherent environment or the threat environment that we are in, you can go on and read about it online. We've got this huge thing called the Pacific Ocean in between us and our what we would consider our primary threat in the world today. So we're talking about flying across that ocean and then executing an engagement phase on the back end of that. So you're looking at 6, 7, 8 hours of flying where you're just literally kind of dragging. It's called dragging behind the tanker, right? So the tanker's dragging you across the ocean. You're just in a line, getting gas, just trying to stay awake, trying to survive. And then you have to go and do the dogfight, right? So we're really working on strategies. That's where that nutrition and hydration really come into play.
Yeah.
We're working on strategies to make sure that we can keep pilots engaged and capable when they get there to be able to then go into that workout phase or that execution phase.
Yeah.
Those are some of the biggest challenges.
Yeah. What is like the kind of like the flight readiness and pre-flight routine? I imagine this is very similar to like a real training session where you want to be warmed up properly, making sure all the breathing patterns are dialed in, muscles are turned on. Like it's there's got to be something that everyone is doing to prepare themselves for the intensity of the flight.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody has kind of their own individual routine, but we always give recommendations based on what you should be doing. So the one thing that the Air Force has done, well, the Air Force has done a lot of things well, but in the last couple of years, they've created this program called Optimizing the Human Weapon System, OHWS. And what that does is it effectively employs athletic trainers, massage therapists, and strength coaches right in the unit. So they're embedded in the unit. The athletic trainers will physically sit in the squadron. The massage therapist will usually be somewhere around there too, and then we'll have a gym specifically built out for the pilots with a strength and conditioning professional. So when it comes to flying a specific sortie, the day before or the days leading up to the flight, you're going to have tons of mission planning. So the individual will go in and mission plan, prepare all of the primary, secondary, tertiary functions that they're going to be doing during that mission. And then the day of, they're going to go into a brief, and everybody kind of handles their day a little bit differently. We try not to, for individuals that are on the workout train, we try to tell them, hey, if you're going to be going into a high G sortie during that day, maybe don't do your heavy squats that morning, right? Maybe go after the flight, or just do like a light, easy workout that morning. Just get your blood flowing. So we always try to recommend get a well-rounded breakfast in. So hit all your macronutrients. If you're going to have coffee, have it in a natural form, coffee or tea. Try not to suck down energy drinks. And then try to have a regular bowel movement as well prior to flying. Now, this can be challenging sometimes because you're talking about a brief that's 5 in the morning, and then they're taking off at 7 in the morning. So getting that strategy is sometimes difficult, but really that's where it starts. The foundation is nutrition, because especially when it comes to hydration, making sure that they're well hydrated. with hydration and the AGSM, what we found is that your ability to do your AGSM can be reduced by about 40% just by being dehydrated, right? So we know that hydration has a huge role in not only our muscular, not only how we perform muscular, but also our brain as well. So just
Yeah.
even a 2 or 3% dehydrated state can be very, very detrimental.
Mm.
So we try to make sure we start with the basics of nutrition and hydration to prepare them for that day. And then with the OHWS that I was mentioning, a lot of times what we'll have is those athletic trainers prior to them going to the operations desk and getting their step brief is what it's called. So you get your weather and your tactics for the day before you actually walk out to the flight line to get in the jet. We send them to the athletic trainer. They'll do some warm ups. So basically, from the top all the way to the bottom, really focusing on that good spine movement. So we go in from the top to the bottom, neck all the way down to the lumbar, going through the shoulders. I always tell them any muscle that attaches to the spine, you should warm up in some degree.
Mm.
And then sometimes they'll get a little massage gun just to get some blood flow to those tissues prior to going to the jet. Because not only are we talking about the G forces and the blood going to the lower part of the body, we're talking about the mechanical load that the spine has to take, right? And not only that, but when we're talking about pulling G's, if you're in a defensive posture, you're looking back like this. So you have a ton of axial loading through that spine. And what you get is just neck and back and neck and back and neck and back over and over and over again. And really, that's why this OHWS program became so prominent or such a need for it the last couple of years, because they finally realized, hey, these pilots are hurt and they're getting out of the Air Force at rates that we can't meet our need for pilots. I mean, you hear about it all the time in the news. The Air Force has pilot shortages because these guys are just putting their body through the most extreme environments, and then they see the cozy Southwest job where he just kind of jumps in the cockpit, pushes the
Sounds so
buttons, goes
boring.
flying. Yeah, I mean it is, but it makes a little bit of money, and it's not nearly
It's a
as
little
stressful
bit
on your
easier.
body.
Yeah.
So
One of my
that's one of
best
the
friends is a Blue Angel. He's potentially headed that direction. I'm like, dude, you were just out there performing in front of thousands of people doing the coolest stuff ever. Now you're gonna like put me in the back with 500 other people and think that that's fun. It's like you're gonna be ready to quit in 3 weeks for sure. There's no way that's cool.
yeah. A lot of those guys do miss it, but what you do see is a lot of guys will transition into like the guard or the reserves, take a part-time role. They'll go fly for the
Yeah,
airlines, 80, 90% of the time, and then you get to get in a jet once a month and go fly and do super cool stuff.
just to
So
keep their chops. Yeah,
yeah, but back to the question, right? So preparing for that day, it does take that preparation. Again, that's going to be individual drive as well. Like how prepared you are for that day is really going to be the person. Some people, they're super focused on that. They got their nutrition locked in. Some people, they kind of a little bit more lackadaisical about it. Doesn't mean they're going to be any better or worse when we're talking about preparation for the actual flight, but they might land and be like, man, I feel absolutely awful. And it's like, yeah, because you didn't take care of yourself before you went to fly.
Mm.
Right. I, so just a little, I guess, taking a step back, I should have mentioned this at the beginning. I'm a backseat flyer, right? I'm a non-rated aircrew member, which means I can jump in the back seat and fly with these guys. And when I was stationed at Shaw, I was flying in the F-16s all the time. And there was a very noticeable difference. Guys that I flew with, when we'd get done, depending on what we actually did during that flight, some of them would just be absolutely zonked, and some of them would be like just ready to rock and ready to do
yeah,
the next thing. And you can see that in the mentality. You can see that for individuals that tend to be in the gym 3, 4, 5 times a week. Guys that
yeah,
really take care of themselves, they have more success getting out of the jet than guys that don't. So
yeah.
really that's what the OHWS program is focused on, making sure that even if you're one of the guys who doesn't necessarily take care of yourself, the resources are there to force you to like walk past that athletic trainer every day and be like,
Yeah.
I should probably go in there. I should probably go in there to get in there to get your body worked on, to get some of those musculoskeletal issues taken care of. So that way we can just have healthier pilots doing a better job. And then not only that, we can retain them on the back end.
Yeah.
Yeah,
On the
most
yeah,
people are in good shape though. Like if you're dealing with elite performers, like there can't be that many of them that are like out of shape, I wouldn't think. Or am I just like totally off the mark here?
Yeah, I wouldn't say you're totally off the mark, but it is, right? It's not Hollywood. We're not all like, you don't walk in, it's not a 6 foot guy, 185 pounds, strapping individual or gal as well, right? We've got plenty of gals rocking it and doing the job as well.
Hmm.
You see people of all sizes in the aviation community. You've got the kind of prototypical, big broad shoulders, strapping young lads, and then you have kind of rail thin tall guys. You kind of have some stockier short guys. You get every measure of male and female body type, essentially. And some of them, individuals, especially who played sports growing up, they tend to stay a little bit more in shape. They stay a little bit more focused. And then you have other individuals who, uh, you know, they might go for a run every once in a while. They might go to the gym with their buddies,
Yeah.
but they might be just kind of a very in a variable state of fitness, is what I would call it.
it's
So
very
it's
nice of
totally up
you.
to them what they choose to do. There's no requirements on how they stay prepared, etc.
Correct. Correct. The only thing they're required to meet is the Air Force standard, which is a PT test 1 to 2 times a year, and all that is push-ups, sit-ups, and a mile and a half run.
Mm.
And
That's
if
a
you,
lot. That's a little bit to ask for someone driving a multi-million dollar rocket, basically. That's a fast plane for someone. You just go, yeah, you passed.
yeah,
Yeah.
that is absolutely where we're at. But what we're doing is we're trying to, as a fitness professional myself, as a physiologist, we're trying to teach these guys and gals that, like, hey, by the way, if you keep your body in better shape, it's going to
Yeah,
treat you better when you are performing. So if you think that you're walking around not flying a jet feeling like crap, how do you think you're going to feel when you fly a jet?
yeah,
Right? So the more prepared we can get them physically and mentally, just in their everyday life, the more prepared they are going to be to go fly the jet or do the thing in whatever aircraft they're flying and do the mission well, and then come back and also continue living their lives and doing their daily activities.
yeah. In your specific role, are you doing kind of research and figuring out kind of physiologically? I'd love to almost know what it looks like when someone is preparing, like running cortisol blood tests before and after flights, and seeing like what that intensity and physical load does to somebody hormonally, and then like how are you able to um, get them back to homeostasis in the fastest, safest way so that they're able to kind of get immediately into a into recovering post flight. Are you doing that's just an example. I'm sure you have millions of other things that you would like to research, but are you doing any specific research and kind of on the biomarker side of things?
As far as the biomarker side of things, I'm still fairly new to this specific role that I'm in.
Yeah,
So everything that I've done up to this point has been passive monitoring, whether that's counseling, whether that's I've done some work with the Whoop and the Aura. We all kind of have the Garmin watch, but when it comes to passive monitoring, we all know that they're not perfect and some are a little bit better than others. So there's only so much information that you can get from those devices. But you can usually establish an individual baseline for how we're treating each individual pilot. Now, at the weapons school, there's a lot of cool stuff going on. I'm going to be diving in, trying to figure out what I can get involved in. But there's also some test and evaluation squadrons that are here and at Edwards. Edwards also has the test pilot school, the TPS. There have been, so I don't want to speak on behalf of what they're doing. I just know from like the 3,000 foot view what they have done. I know they've done some stuff with the continuous glucose monitoring
yeah,
during flight. We've got a lot of integrated systems that are coming through, like our Air Force Research Laboratory, that can measure O2 and CO2 in the mask to do real-time physiological changes. They've got these integrated vests that are on the pilot. They've got a whole bunch of systems that are monitoring actively while they're flying. Now, the hardest part with putting these things in the jet when we're talking about in-flight monitoring is that there's requirements for like the ejection seat, there's requirements for the aircraft, there's the aircraft has to be, or the device has to be cleared through the special programs office, because when you're talking about an aircraft that has top secret information and material, none of that stuff can be monitoring unless it's cleared by the programs office. So I don't want to speak on behalf of those. There's a lot of cool stuff going on in the Air Force that I'm hoping to dive into, and then maybe start looking at some of those biomarkers and you know, as we've talked, I really want to do that in the next 6 months to a year, where we can start monitoring some of those things for the pilots to identify, hey, where are these guys breaking down and where can we build them up? And I don't want to do that reactively. I want to do that proactively. I want to identify how these pilots work, where their shortfalls are. How do we supplement that? How do we make them better before they get into the jet? Because the environment's always evolving. The threats are always evolving. So we need to make sure that we are building the best pilots in the world prior to walking back on how we didn't get them where they needed to be so that they were ready for that environment.
I love it, man. Where can people learn more?
Yeah, so I think I sent the link over for my professional profile is LinkedIn. I think you can just look me up, Zachary_Carson, and you'll see me in my uniform and all my glory. If you're watching this video, you'll see my face just plastered right there. My personal profile, if you want to see what I'm up to in my daily life and my family, Instagram is Zachary_Carson. But on LinkedIn, for sure, if you shoot me a message and you want to learn a little bit more, this is all very 3,000-foot view.
Yeah.
If you want to dive in with more specific questions about physiology, about some of the things that we're trying to get after at the weapons school, I'd be happy to answer those questions on LinkedIn. But before I do depart, I do want to say that everything that I have talked about today are my own opinions, right? They're not the opinions of the head of the Air Force. I also don't want to speak on behalf of anybody. I'm a physiologist. I'm not a pilot. So if there's anything that I said today that sounds a little bit off, it might not be 100%. And then in respect to the Navy, please don't jump on me with anything that I said in regards to Top Gun. I was in the Navy once. I'm a squid. So I still have that near and dear to my heart.
What is the craziest creature you've seen at the bottom of the ocean when you were a diver?
So I wasn't a diver. I was a rescue swimmer.
Still way deep.
We're surface level swimmers. But we saw sharks a lot when we were flying along. Tiger sharks mostly around the coastal waters of the Pacific. Yeah, we don't jump in the water when we see those. We tend to circle back.
I remember talking to one of them when we were training him down there that said he came like face to face with a hammerhead. He was like, that thing is a prehistoric creature. You do not, whether it comes after you or not, you just look at it and you go, we are not supposed to be friends. That is not a thing you want to be messing with when you're all the way down at the bottom.
So I'm a freshwater kid. I'm from Michigan. So I grew up on Lake Michigan. I tell people all the time, I don't go in the ocean. It tastes terrible. It's bad for your skin. Like there's things that can kill you in it.
Yeah.
The freshwater, it's great. Yeah. Freshwater is great. It feels good to get into. It's refreshing. You might, if you're in the wrong place, you might meet a sturgeon that's prehistoric, but they're not going to kill you for sure.
I like the ocean. I like them both.
I like them both.
The ocean's got waves, especially in San Diego. It's the best. Beautiful sun, cold water.
That's fair.
Life is good. Douglas E. Larson.
Yeah, that's it. On Instagram, Douglas E. Larson. Zach, appreciate you coming on the show, man. I find all this very, very interesting and exciting. So enjoyed having you on.
Outstanding. Thank you.
I'm Anders Varner at Anders Varner, and we are Barbell Shrugged, Barbell_Shrugged. And make sure you get over to aratelab.com. That is where you can learn about all of the performance lab testing, analysis, and coaching that we do inside Rapid Health Optimization. And you can access all of that over at aratelab.com. Friends, we'll see you guys next week.